So I've been seeing this TikTok.
Rome wasn't real, realizing that probably was a metaphor.
Or, more specifically, I've been seeing responses to this TikTok emerge basically everywhere I inhabit. And it has revealed an interesting side of humanity, although it is nothing new. Hardly a revelation of profundity. Humans hate and collectively claw at any opinion that speaks out against the centralized narrative that they have constructed. Now, this statement is not in support or dissolvement of reality being real or not, it is simply to question the human perception of it. But let's first look at what we're using as reality for this conversation. I am not talking about any externalized objective reality, only the processed, received, and interpreted reality that humans experience. This type of reality is not a fixed, immutable thing. It is clear that reality undergoes change. Reality in this sense is more than just X object as being represented purely as X object in abstraction. This reality is X object, whatever that is being seen to be X object, but through a filter of what X object really is. There are, of course, even within the mainstream perceptions of reality, multiple ways to see X object as a thing within reality. Multiple levels of resolution are accepted, each of which still point to the same realization of X object. I can look at a chair at the level of being a once living but now dead tree, processed and reformatted into an apparatus upon which I can sit. But then, is it a chair? Is it a tree? Is it neither and only wood? Or is it all of these things? Would it be generally accepted then to say I am sitting on a living but destined to be dead and processed tree? Probably not, but the receiver would still recognize this as being a technically accurate description of reality, which then immediately opens a window for reality being more than a fixed representation in time, and instead a time-traversing concept. But then, at which point do we draw the line? Equally, the line can extend historically to the past until you could quite accurately describe your chair as a seed, or an asteroid perhaps, or even a star. I am sitting on a star, prove me wrong. Inversely, to apply the generally accepted triform time progression, the chair is also rubbish, it is worm food, it is cellulose, it is generally an infinite collection of possible futures. But each of these are still, technically, through social conventions, correct. I am sitting on a star, which is also worm food. And this transition of reality is only observed through the basic, more unidimensional development of an object, without altering the interpretation of the viewer. If a viewer had existed at a past time in the chair's development and for whatever reason had declared the tree from which the wood came to be instead a shade giver and never a tree specifically, and so the future offspring would be that I sit on a shade giver that is also worm food. This is, given the logic before, still an accurate description of reality, but it becomes quite quickly less socially accepted, so we can derive from this that the reality is more of a social construct than a hard rule. And so, like most social constructs, reality is violently received and defended. Perhaps not so much that this statement in opposition is particularly evil or wrong or harmful, but more that it disturbs the relative peace and lack of mental gymnastics a person has to endure on a daily basis to arrive at a simplified interpretation of just what is going on out there. You can imagine being displeased at waves that relentlessly crash against your boat and rock the entire thing throughout your journey. And so you begin to hate the waves themselves despite their lack of inherent evil or malintention. Indeed, the waves are simply the result of further out disturbances, and eventually the moon is to blame. So this TikTok, or at another resolution, the person putting it out, is seen as the avatar of this disturbance, the culmination of these forces all contriving to rock the social boat of reality. But without these waves, without these disturbances, no central line of minimal disturbance could be derived. Opposition is required for a position to be opposed to exist, and inversely a position to be opposed is required for the opposition to exist in its pure state of being. The person then is not particularly the source of this disturbance, but she represents the only visible portal through which the disturbance flows out, and so you can see this en masse attack on the person as an attempt to destroy or stem this portal to preserve the collective boat's stasis. So then, we can clearly see that the respondents, despite their lack of perhaps obvious awareness, somehow instinctively understand this as a threat to their mainline narrative, which formed the current reality story. Because rather than being inherently wrong or right, the idea itself represents very little but disturbing to their otherwise decided ways of being. Newton's first law of motion states that a body at rest will remain at rest unless an outside force acts upon it, and a body in motion at a constant velocity will remain in motion in a straight line unless acted upon by an outside force. So people do seem to have an underlying understanding, perhaps collectively, of how to best protect the group's peaceful transition through reality, or the narrative of it.